bringing my record for chair to the back.
Okay, you ready? All right. I call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the May 5th, 2025 study session of your Ashland City Council. Excuse me? We've started? Thank you. There are two agenda items on our agenda this evening, the budget backgrounder number 3, and then the nonprofit corporation low-income housing property tax exemption program. I see that there are quite a few folks here this evening, so I want to make sure everyone understands how to sign up to speak to us. If you have come this evening to talk to us about an item that is on our agenda, you'll fill out a speaker request form, which is just right there on the top of that, in that little bin. You'll give it to Alyssa, our recorder, and on that form, you will make sure that you let us know if you're here to speak to a specific agenda item or if you are here to speak to us about something that is not on our agenda. If it is the case that you are here to speak to us about something that is not on our agenda, please make sure that you mark that as public forum, and that will help us bring you up at the correct time. The other thing is to make sure that you have submitted your form before we get to the agenda item that you are here to speak on, and public forum is the very first item on the list. So if you're here tonight and you'd like to talk to us about something that's not on the agenda, please get the form filled out immediately. So we do have 7 people who have signed up for public forum this evening. We have a 15-minute time limit on public forum, and so each person will get 2 minutes. The way that this works is that you will come up to the podium and the microphone to my right, and you'll tell us your name and the city where you reside, and then you'll have 2 minutes. Alyssa there's a little stoplight right alongside you there to let you know as you're getting closer to the end of your 2-minute time frame. There's also timers on the wall to help you know how much time you have left. If the final buzzer rings, please finish the sentence you're on so that we can move to the next person. And with that, we will get started with public forum. There, I think. Yeah. So the first person is, and go ahead and just line up behind the podium if you would. The first person is Stasia Stimac, and then we have Ashley Cropper, George Dearson, and Sharon Bryson. And then I will name the other people as we start to move down the list. Well, at least we know it's on.
Hello.
Yeah, you can pull it up towards you. Okay. There you go.
Okay. Just hit the screen button.
It'll start automatically. Okay. So go ahead.
My name is Stasia Stimac, and I am an Ashland resident. I am here tonight as an Ashland Little League board member and a parent deeply rooted in this community. This season, we have 176 players, which takes nearly 60 volunteers to operate, including board members, coaches, umpires, scorekeepers, field prep, and maintenance, all working to keep this program accessible for families. There was no meeting of the minds or adequate notice before Parks and Rec voted to change our field use fee from a flat seasonal rate to an hourly per field structure. Shifting from a $250 flat fee to an hourly rate could raise our costs to $3,000 to $5,000 per season, depending on enrollment. Little League thrives on flexibility. More kids means more field time. An hourly model penalizes that, forcing us to raise registration fees or reduce field access, neither of which aligns with Ashland's goals of being affordable and family-friendly. Ashland Little League has invested in these fields for decades, building those batting cages, maintaining the grounds, providing equipment, and cleaning up vandalism on our own. We've proposed a 300% increase to our flat fee. We've asked Parks and Rec how much time is spent at Hunter Park and the associated costs, but we haven't received an answer. If field time must be tracked before and after every use, who's doing that work and at what cost? Finally, as a parent, I was born and raised in Ashland, graduated from SOU, And after 15 years in Colorado, I moved back so my kids could experience the same incredible community I grew up in, including parks, trails, and affordable youth programs. Please do not move forward with a yes vote out of settling a budget. We ask that you vote no and reevaluate the decision in partnership with those impacted the most. Thank you for your time in supporting Ashland children.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, Mayor and City Councilors. I'm Ashley Cropper, a working mother of 2 little boys who are 3 and 6 years old. I was born and raised in Ashland, then moved back 4 years ago from Colorado to raise my children here because I could not think of a better place to be as a family with an amazing community. I'm coming here to talk to you during truly the busiest hour of my day in between soccer practice and dinners that should be happening, to ask you to please vote no against the budget Parks and Rec commissioners have proposed. I'm asking you to vote no because we as a community need you to ask the hard questions. Where has our money gone? Why wasn't this urgent earlier? Why has there not been changes in the past to prepare for this moment, to prepare for inflation and rising costs? Please ask Parks why they are targeting certain groups, especially families in Ashland. Ask them why Ashland Soccer Club and Little League, the community garden, who are already paying fees and handle their fields and gardens without support from Parks, to be asked for more money or to be shut down. What is the end goal here? Why are what are well-loved and heavily used amenities like the ice skating rink, Garfield splash pad, Daniel Meyer pool being threatened to close? If the current administration for Parks can't find a way to fund our bathrooms with a $14 million budget, then they deserve our critiques and owe our citizens a huge explanation. This is a pivotal moment for our town. There is no community when families are gone. Voting no will demonstrate to Parks they must figure out their budget. We want the commissioners to put in the hard work, find the solutions, and present a different budget that supports the whole community. Do you want to walk by the parks and see no one playing there? Do you want to see another school closed? That is the direction we are headed, and I do not believe that is who Ashland is. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Is George Dearson here? George? Yeah. You're next, and then we have Sharon Bryson, and then Letta Shapiro, and Nathan Vandegraff, followed by Mary Scott.
Hi, my name is George Pearson. For over 40 years, the Ashland area has been my home. My children attended Ashland schools, as do my grandkids today. After relocating from Alaska and a couple of years in Merlin, I discovered Ashland and determined that this would be my forever home. Over the years, I watched the living costs continue to rise, far outpacing the other communities of the state. In 1982, Ashland and Grants Pass each had a population of around 18,000. Today, Ashland is just over 21,000, while Grants Pass has grown to over 39,000. Why? Affordability? Early on, I remember Kathy Golden pushing hard for a 1% meals tax. What? During the same cycle, Eugene floated a similar tax, but their measure failed. The Ashland measure was worded as a 1% tax that could eventually rise up to a maximum of 5% if a future council chose to make a change. That part wasn't really made clear. I supported the measure and I supported the revote, but once the council voted to approve the election, Mayor Golden suggested, why wait? Why don't we just move to the limit now and be done with it? And it was finalized at 5% in 5 minutes. I never trusted her again. I never voted for her again. Since then, I've seen the city taxpayers, including me, spending millions to prop up a dilapidated, dying golf course. The real golf pros laugh at, and while their master class greenway is just 15 minutes north. Oh, and the millions lost every year on this ridiculous idea of a city-owned cable internet provider? I'm not a big fan of Spectrum. I've had both providers, and the competition did not provide the suggested price decrease, while Spectrum customers have better service, better content, and better reliability. Now retired, I determined that the rising costs in Ashland have soon priced me out. I love my quiet village home, but it made more sense to downsize and move to a mobile and talent so my kids can one day fight over it. Hopefully, far into the future. And thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sharon Bryson. I've been an Ashland resident for over 35 years. My late husband and I raised 6 kids here. Thank you for denying.
Ma'am, can you pull that microphone in?
Did you take up some of my time?
Yes, well, can you restart her time?
Thank you for denying the park's request for the $9 fee and this allowed time to process. I get it that costs of employees have risen, and I understand about Measure 5 and 50, but I don't understand how leadership has chosen to address these challenges. I would like to address slide number 17 of the packet for this evening. The author wrote Pathways to Increasing Revenue. The ideas are sequenced from hardest to easiest. The hardest, they say, is to change the statewide tax system. The next is to create a new taxing district. The next is to increase development and then create a local option levy. And the easiest is to do a fee. All except the easiest are going to take time. I would like the council to consider other pathways that could result in quicker and more sustainable solutions. I don't understand the dynamics between the parks and the council, so forgive me if my suggestions are outside of the scope of what you are charged to. So my first possibility is to reduce supervisor and management costs by 20% throughout all city departments. My second possibility is pause professional training, travel, and East Main Park development. Number 3, design equal reduction across all parks programs. Number 4, consider including more adopt-a-park options and honor those who volunteer. And then my 5th one is to sell assets, and I would have the golf course at the top of the list. Reason being is if it loses $200,000 a year over the income and it uses all the water, that doesn't seem very, very wise. I'm not against golfers, please, but I am against the loss of money and water. And I did go to several of the parks meetings, and my question that I didn't get answered was how many people use the golf course? And I was told that we don't collect Social Security numbers, we only collect tee times. And so since I didn't know about tee time, or I wanted to know about people, I did my own little research by driving by 3 little parks and comparing that to the golf course. It's 50 to 1.
Thank you. Letta.
Hi. Lita Shapiro, Ashland. Most of you know me, for better or worse. The budget, according to today's agenda and our finance director, is to ensure ongoing fiscal ability to provide desired and required services at an acceptable level. I do not believe that what Parks is threatening is an acceptable level of services. Parks' job is to maintain the parks within the approved budget, and I believe that can be done. The budget process can be reviewed and balanced within the 5% decrease without cutting services, with rates for rentals, et cetera, that people can afford. The threatening of service stoppages, closures, unless the budget is a 9% increase and new fees, is simply not true. It is not necessary to make the cuts presented. The council is to be commended for not acquiescing to the demand for the new parks fees thus far. The parks budget has not been transparent about the process, nor has it done the required homework to address the need to cut expenses. We all know that there are many ways to cut a budget, but instead of simple analysis and transparency, they have aimed at cuts on essential services and threats to the most vulnerable, seniors and families. Bullying and making threats are not how to be better together. I hope the council will not knuckle under this bullying, but demand the budget reduction as initially requested Alden Martin's take, a 5% cut. It is then up to Parks to do a real analysis. I must add that reading about other cities going through this process, we all understand it is time for fiscal cautiousness. Thank you for standing with the people that voted for you, confident you will stand up for fiscal responsibility. Please take the responsible stand and do not allow this increased parks budget to be appropriated. Thank you.
Thank you. Nathan?
Yeah. Nathan Vandegraff, I'm an Ashland resident. I spoke at the Ashland Parks and Rec Commission meeting last week about the impact the changes to field fees would have on the Ashland Soccer Club. I'm the treasurer of the Ashland Soccer Club, so I'm intimately familiar with our finances and the impact that this will have on the 350 children that we currently have in our club. We currently offer free soccer to over 100 kids in the community, and with the proposed increase in field rental rates, free soccer will no longer exist, only for those who need it from a scholarship perspective. Today, it's offered to all kindergarten and first grade, and it's heavily discounted at second grade. We've already notified families as a result of the vote last week that free soccer is no longer available, and our rates will be increasing in order to offset the increased fees. APRC made the argument that they aren't charging market rates for fields, but the fact is, they don't have a market quality product. You can go to any other community in the valley and the soccer fields are going to be significantly better. They're charging the kinds of rates that APRC was discussing, but they have a significantly better product. And so, we will happily spend that money in other communities. Our costs also don't scale with the amount of time that we're actually on these fields. The costs are relatively fixed regardless of the amount of use that a team sees. The reality is I support our parks. I use our trails and our parks basically daily. It's part of the reason why my family of 6 moved here. But decisions to disinvest in the facilities most important to a family at a time when we desperately need them is an embarrassment. We continue to, prioritize things like the golf course, but threaten to close the splash pad, bathrooms. I honestly don't know that a no vote is what I'm even in support of. But as sitting at the meeting last week, it was quite appalling to hear people discuss, millions of dollars in increases without really understanding what was going into it. Just a flippancy of, I don't really understand the numbers, but I'm okay to approve them. That kind of behavior seems unacceptable, and I would hope that you'd reconsider to vote.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mary Scott. I'm a volunteer at the Night Lawn. This Wednesday morning, I arrived at 7 a.m. to the surprising news that there would be enforcement of the rule requiring full removal of all items from the lawn at 7 a.m. Anything still on the lawn was to be impounded. A large poster of all the Night Lawn regulations had been posted on Tuesday, less than 24 hours earlier. So, could we serve breakfast, or should we only focus on helping to collect items we could get in the shed? Did we have other options, such as storing items in volunteer cars? We tried to do all of these things, but Wednesday morning was counterproductive. There was stress, there was trauma. Yes, thankfully, there was law enforcement discretion. The police sweep started at 8 a.m., and we were very grateful. We were able to get many items collected, but it was chaotic. Further, items had to be stored wet in a warm shed, which causes mold. This is a health issue. So please consider these suggestions and requests. The volunteers need ongoing, monthly communication and discussion meetings with the city manager, the chief of police, or their authorized representatives. We need a second shed desperately. We need notification within 24 hours of an expulsion of an individual from the lawn so that we can get their essential belongings like ID back to them. Thank you very much for listening to me. I think that Ashland residents want full, open, compassionate communication about this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we move now to our first agenda item, the budget background number 3.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilor. Mary Ann Berry, Finance Director, and I also have here with me Bryn Morrison, Deputy Finance Director. We are back again for the final study session on the frequently asked budget questions, and we also have Deputy Brooklyn providing a deep dive on Oregon property tax measures 5 and 50, which will help better understand why we and many other Oregon cities are where we are in the general fund. First, we'll start off by doing a quick review of the budget process and where we are now in the timeline. As you know, last November, we met as a leadership team to discuss the city's needs as we move into the next budget cycle. Anticipating already that some costs were going to outpace revenues, we received the direction from the city manager to maintain zero growth in materials and services and no additions to personnel apart from cost of living and healthcare increases as we were preparing that. After the month of December closed, each department got to work on their own individual budgets. They estimated where they would end the year and what carry forwards would look like as we moved into the new biennium. Projections were made on revenue streams that each department is responsible for and their related expenditures. Once we received all the information in March, the data was uploaded into our budgeting portal, OpenGov, and the initial preliminary budget was assembled for review. This is when the bulk of the work began on balancing the budget. In March and April, we were able to balance the budget through a combination of cost trimming, personnel realignment, and increasing the public service fee and wildfire mitigation fees. And as you know, the first Citizens Budget Committee met last Wednesday, and the committee will continue to deliberate and eventually approve a recommended budget this month to send to council for adoption in June. Prior to adoption, changes to the budget can be made. However, if it is more than 10%, then a public hearing is needed. And you as council are slated to vote on adopting the budget on June 3rd. And that is the timeline. We have been fielding a fair number of questions on general fund revenues, and we will try to answer some of them here. We have discussed in previous study sessions that our largest revenues in the general fund are property taxes, franchise fees, and electric user tax, among others here on this slide, and that they have not kept up with the cost increases of personnel, which is our largest segment of expenditures at 62%. Property taxes, electric fees, and franchise fees alone account for about 54% of total revenues in the general fund. That leaves a host of other revenues to project, such as building and planning fees, licenses, other taxes such as liquor, cigarette, and marijuana, parks fees, fines, and other fees for services. Overall, we can go to the next slide. Overall, the general fund has over 110 lines of revenues to project. While some have increases, others are decreasing. Department heads are tasked with making reasonable assertions as to what revenues will come in at given the current economic landscape. Only in aggregating the data do we see the full picture. And soon we'll go to the property tax discussion, but before that, we wanted to also talk a little bit about the OpenGov portal that we've been fielding questions on. Some questions were how to drill down on general fund revenue detail. And Bryn, could you first show where to go from the, yeah. So if someone is looking for general fund revenues, they would go to the department summaries. Oh, fund summaries, sorry, I can't see with my glasses. And then drill down to the general fund. So that's the page that she's on now. And then drilling down a little bit, or scrolling down a little bit further, you can see the general fund revenue by type. And if you click on that, on the bottom right corner there, view report, and go ahead and do that, Bryn, thank you. You should be able to see the details of the revenue. Some folks were asking about parks revenues and how to access those line items, and it's because it's all in the general fund, you would need to, and you can go ahead and expand all of that. You need to just go ahead and look for those parks fees in the general fund. And maybe go to one so that you can, and there are some park fees right there, and if you scroll over to the right, you get to the 26-27 budget. So all the tables in the interactive budget book have that view report on the very bottom of the table. If you click into that, you should be able to drill into each of those tables in detail, and that will get you a little bit more information.
Before we move on,
Sure.
Councillor Bloom?
Thank you, and thank you for putting this together. As we're kind of walking through this, I appreciate showing people where the revenues are coming from, and obviously, given some of the testimony we just heard, excuse me, you can see the use of facility fees jump quite significantly in what's being proposed. I was wondering if could you walk through for the audience, people at home, expenses. So we've got revenues. I think some people in the community would like to see how they can look at and identify expenses as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want to go to general fund expenditures or any? Yeah. Finance, okay. So here we're scrolling into the finance department. So that's under department summaries, and then you click into a specific department that you might be looking for. And then going down to the tables, particularly in finance, we've got 3 divisions. You can do the general expenditures, or you can drill down by division. And let's do administration. Yeah, let's do administration. And if you go down to that table and hit view report, it takes you into the portal, and you're able to start clicking into the individual lines of expenditures.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Just so I'm clear, can you scroll down on the left sidebar to just so I can see which report you're looking at, Bryn? Would that be? Because those, Marianne, if I'm correct, those hyperlinks just go kind of right to that filter. Or are we on views? Okay. So
Into
if
the
you can scroll down
25-27 budget.
Okay,
Proposed
so you're
budget.
on, okay, that's where you're at. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Kaplan?
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, Brandon. This is really great to walk us through this. There's the piece that I'd like to add here is this table is really useful as well because it shows 23, 24 actual,
Yes.
24, 25 budget, and then it shows that compared. So now if you look at any one of those lines, whichever one, internal charges and fees, you can look at the 23, 24 for actual was, I can't quite read it from here, it looks like 596,000, and the budget for 24-25 was 403. So expecting less. The budget, we budgeted for less expenses. We actually had more expenses, and then the proposed budget for 25-26 looks like it's 461 and 462. So coming down below the 23-24 actual, the 24-25 adopted budget it's not an actual. It's just a budget. The actual you'd have to go to a different place because this view doesn't show us the actual expenditures to date, but you have
Correct.
you'd have to do that, and we've got now, we've got
3 more months.
What's that?
3 more months to the end of the year.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the methodology that we follow for internal services is such that we true up the budget. You might be better served to describe it.
Sure. So the administrative, for example, the administrative fee is an internal charge.
Right.
Can you hear me? That other departments pay the internal departments. So, for example, finance, we don't pay the internal fee for administrative. So let me expand this internal charges and fees so you can truly see the items underneath it. And then I'll scroll over again.
I didn't mean to ask about that specific
Okay.
one. That was just the top of the line. That was just the first one.
okay.
I was just trying to make the point that there is that comparison. I wasn't really
Okay.
Right.
meaning to get into a deep hole about that specific line. We can. I'm happy to do it if you'd like, but I don't want to take you down a rabbit hole that I didn't really intend. It was just an example.
Okay, yeah. We can talk about it during the Citizen Budget Committee because we'll be talking about general fund in more depth there.
right.
And that methodology comes into play when talking about the general fund. But yes, you can certainly go into the actuals for 21, 22, 23, and then for 20, and then 24, but then 25 is an estimate.
Can I
Yes.
ask one more? So we can get the actuals by going to a different report in the annuals, in the annual side up there, a little bit scrolled up. But it doesn't, then it's a little bit of a trick to try to compare that with this. Is there any way to ask open.gov to program this particular report so we can get the actuals to date, even though, you know, it's obviously going to be less. We've only been 10 months of the year instead of 12 months of the year, so it's always going to be lower in expenses, probably lower in revenues as well, rather than having to go and compare the actual to date and see where we are tracking.
You would like it combined into this report?
Into this budget report, because since we're talking about a budget, it's nice to compare the budgets to the actuals. You know, many times we can do it, as you said, it's in the reports, but you've got to compare two different reports. It doesn't combine it into a single report. You know what I'm saying?
It's labor intensive, and I don't, so right now, this proposed budget is built this way. I can surely go into the annual and build views that would mimic this, but only for this year. I can't lay them over the top of each other.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Go ahead, Jordan.
Mayor, if I may ask a question, is it possible to export from OpenGov into Excel?
Absolutely.
And I think we could potentially build our own tables outside
Build our own
of that.
tables.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And so
I don't want to do that myself. And
We may be able to provide that for you.
If I can follow up behind Councilor Kaplan's question, because I know that one of the difficulties when you get to this point in a fiscal year is that you can sometimes be able to tell if you've got a line item that is really not performing one way or the other the way you expected it to. But not everything comes in at the total budget divided by 12. So there isn't an automatic formula that you can assign to any of these numbers to be able to tell how are we actually working, you know, line item by line item. We can't tell that. And so what has been your process? I imagine that internally, each of the departments has looked at all of these line items and said, are these tracking based on what is known about that particular
Correct.
line item? Do they need to be adjusted for the new year?
Yeah.
Can you speak to that process?
Sure.
Just a
Yeah,
bit?
thank you for that question, because I would like to also just summarize that, for the most part, OpenGov for the city has been a budgeting tool. So it is how we present and report our budget. Our enterprise system is Tyler Munis, and that is where all our financial reporting resides. All our monthly financial reports are coming from Munis, Tyler Munis. So on a monthly basis, our financial statements are prepared, and that's really where a lot of our reconciliations and reviews and analytics come in. Internally, we're actually looking oftentimes for departments line item by line item, and we're able to see, you know, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and then be able to drill down from there. From our perspective, from the finance perspective, our accounting and finance managers are taking a look at it from a little bit broader angle and ensuring that we're in budgetary compliance, and that essentially it's tracking as expected. So there are different levels of review, and then as we drill out into the budget season, we're also looking at it from the OpenGov perspective, if that makes sense.
Councilor Duquesne?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, and I'd like to thank our residents for coming this evening, too. Something that was touched on earlier, and just kind of a follow-up of that, tracking things line item by line item as we move forward. Have we not been doing that per each department?
We do, yes.
We do then. If we've done that, it seems to me that we would have known the predicament and the direction we were going in when it came time to parks much sooner than at the 11th hour.
Well, the budget process, as we were talking about earlier in this presentation, is an intensive process that starts in this particular case in November. And it's a different process than reconciling on a monthly basis and on an annual basis. And certainly on an annual basis, we are refreshing the budget and taking a look at it from the lens of did we meet the budget that we were supposed to for that particular year. And then as we start to work on the audit, we're reconciling those financials from the department up into the city-wide level. Really, the budget process is that intensive process of aggregating the data from all the departments and having them look at it from the lens of this particular economic environment. If you asked us to forecast revenues last year, it would certainly not be the same as what we were doing, the work that we were doing in November, December, January, February. Likewise with expenditures, we didn't know some of the information, and we still may not have all the information to this date. We're just building it based on assumptions, the best assumptions that we know.
I think, if I may, Mayor, I do appreciate your explanation. I just look at where we are right now, and moving forward, there is so much uncertainty. So taking that time that's needed, I think, is super important. But I do appreciate your explanation.
Councillor Hanson?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering if we could go back to the slide. And first couple slides in, you were talking about process. I would just like you to highlight and go over where we're looking at the budget, and then if it comes back to council and there's an increase of, could you go over that slide again?
Sure. So right now, we are in the midst of our Citizens Budget Committee meetings, and we're about to have our second one on Wednesday. As they and you, combined governing body or committee, deliberate on the budget, you, as the committee, can recommend changes for staff to make. Those changes can be additions or deletions of the budget. The committee then approves that budget by vote of 8 on the committee. That has to be the majority. And then from that point, it gets sent over to council, city council, to deliberate as well. You can make changes as well from the recommended budget that the budget committee has sent over. If you make any changes over 10%, it will need another public hearing, but you can make changes up to 10% and then adopt the budget at that date.
Great, and just to clarify, what happens if there's a double dip there between the Citizen Budget Committee and City Council in terms of changing up to upwards of 20%? Would that just fall into the public hearing category?
Well, two things. We still need to balance it. And so if council or if the committee is recommending
Something different?
one thing and pushes it over to council, it would be up to council to decide what to do from there. And if it happens to hit the 10% threshold, then it would determine whether or not it goes into a public hearing.
Okay, yeah, there's just one accounting for that, and it's before it goes to a final vote at the council.
Correct.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councillor Kaplan?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just want to clarify a doubt that's kind of creeping in here from some questions from Councillor Duquesne, and also some of the comments that I heard from some public forum presentations this evening. We're talking about the gaps we're talking about are future gaps based on a gap between projected revenues and projected expenses. They're not gaps in the current biennium that, in this case, we've talked about parks, that parks has come in. I mean, I've looked for deficits in the parks budget, in the parks, performance in 2025, and I'm not seeing that they've overspent their budget. There are some general fund departments that have overspent certain lines in their budget, but we're not really seeing an overspending. So that's not really
correct.
the problem. It sounds to me like the problem really is looking into the future with that crystal ball that we have, and we all know that there's lots of uncertainty, that we're expecting that there's going to be some revenues that are not going to come in, or going to come in at a lower level. And you talked about the grants, for example. But there's also, property taxes, and that's what we're going to get onto later on. And expenses that we expect to go up. So it's not like there's a hole right now. There's a projection of a deficit in the future based on projected revenues and projected expenses, but not any performance today and in this last biennium
That
about
is
any
correct.
particular department.
Yeah.
Because I hear that all the time, that people are saying, how did they mismanage their budget? Well, I'm not seeing that they've
Thank
overspent
you.
their budget.
Yeah, thank you. If I can also further clarify, the budget is structurally balanced. We are not in a deficit. And by that, I mean revenues, operating revenues are covering operating expenditures. We have a carry forward balance. Carry forward balances are always part of resources. And so the balance is budgeted or is balanced based on that. Where we find ourselves in this discussion, as many cities have, is that rising costs have outpaced revenues, and we were able to balance the budget by trimming our costs. Every department had to cut something, and then also having to realign in our personnel, and then adding the two increases in fees, public safety and wildfire mitigation. So given all of that, we've balanced the budget. And there's no deficit.
Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Marianne. I appreciate that. And I want to say that I completely agree with what Councillor Kaplan said, and you both as well, that it's balanced, it's structural, all of that. The question is just maybe get your thoughts relative to ideas, maybe, because that is, we can get one of two things that we might have to, that are kind of our X factors. Number one would be making assumptions, which every organization does, to try to look forward, and those either are within some sort of range or tolerance. We know it's not going to be exact, or there will be some sort of one-off type things that would really throw things for a loop. That's number one that could catch us off guard. Number two is, though, and I don't think that I would recommend changing the 2-year cycle that we do, because a lot of municipalities do one, but then you feel like there is that lost efficiency because you're almost always in budget cycle if you're going annually. So I get that. What I'm curious is if there is, we might consider, and I don't know, this would be something to discuss at a future time, like maybe what happens is, I think we find ourselves, we're balanced, everything's great, everything's within tolerance, but then we're kind of, it's more of a time crunch as we come up, is what happens when we start in November, and it's just how we've done it. But we have that time crunch, and then it's like we're having to, everybody has their day jobs to do everything, and we're doing this. I'm wondering if there is some sort of discussion to be had about maybe earlier forecasting mechanisms. We know that costs are not going down anytime soon. We know that those lines are diverging. They have been for years. You'll get to that in a second. But knowing that that's going to be the case, and knowing that our assumptions are pretty much, you guys pretty much nail your assumptions. You get a one-off if we lose a grant or whatever, but for the most part, you guys do a outstanding job of forecasting that. But I think that we probably might, what would you think about maybe backing up in future biennia of having kind of those department discussions from a forecasting standpoint, not necessarily a budgeting or accounting standpoint, because those are right on, we get the awards. But having that discussion so that we might be able to provide a little bit of input as to direction of where we might get it, so it doesn't take us by, or the community, I would say, by surprise. I mean,
Sure.
we're all in it, but your thoughts on that?
Sure. I absolutely agree that a long-range financial forecast, stabilizing something like that, firming it up, is absolutely needed. I feel like there's always that room for improvement, and incorporating some tools to allow for a more refreshed mid-cycle budget refresh, certainly. And we'll definitely be coming back to discuss that in greater detail going forward. I think there's also ways to look at bolstering our reserve fund, and taking a look at other policies that will create the infrastructure in place for us to be able to have a little bit more margin when it comes to this time frame. Yeah, certainly.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think I'm going to now go ahead and pass the baton to Deputy City Manager Rooklyn and talk about property taxes.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Bryn. Council, I'm here tonight just to provide some background on property tax. Mayor, if you don't mind just relaxing the rules, I would love to take questions during, since it can be a technical conversation.
Yes, that's fine.
All right, beautiful. So property tax here in Oregon. I'm discussing it tonight because it is a large source of our revenue, and it is one of our revenue sources that has a limited level of growth. So I'm just hoping that we all can have a strong basis as to why, to know what the math behind it is. So prior to 1990, Oregon property taxes, your property, if you're a property owner, was assessed every 6 years, and you were taxed on whatever that real market value calculation was at that 6-year mark. Local jurisdictions set their own property tax rates through votes of that jurisdiction, and that is how property taxes were determined and paid. In 1990, we had our first major change with Measure 50, and what Measure 5, that's what I get for not wearing my glasses today. Measure 5, total property taxes became capped, meaning every single property owner only could pay a certain amount of property tax. And then Measure 50 made even larger changes that changed the calculation of property taxes, that capped the growth on what that amount was, and it set permanent rates for every single jurisdiction. So we'll dive a little into the details of what those mean. All right, 1990, Measure 5. So what Measure 5 said is we will cap it so that you're paying no more than $5 per every $1,000 that your property is worth for education, and no more than $10 for every $1,000 that your property is worth for general government. These limits are still in existence today. And if your tax calculation comes out that you would pay more than that, your taxes paid would be compressed, meaning you will be brought down to whatever that limit is. And so if you're looking at the table in the slide in front of you, it shows you that scenario for a house. A house that's real market value is about $200,000. As I said, these numbers might be back from the 1980s. Measure 5 limits said you can't pay more than $1,000 for education or $2,000 for government as your property tax bill, but the city has adopted a tax rate that makes you pay more than that. And so you can see in the red, the compression, the amount that you don't pay is in that red category. And I want to be clear, City of Ashland is not in compression. I will say, I believe it's 61% of cities in Oregon are in compression. While we are not in compression, our education service districts are. So they have reached their limit and they lose out on some tax revenue every year due to Measure 5. All right, 1997, Measure 50. There was a few measures in between 5 and 50, but 50 was the final major change. So that's the one we'll dive deep into. So the first thing Measure 50 did is it set a permanent rate limit for each taxing district. So before a jurisdiction could vote how much taxes they wanted to pay, what Measure 50 is, it set those permanent rates forevermore and that they could not be changed. So Ashland, at that time in 1997, we were charging $4.28 and some little extras for every $1,000 valued. We have been set at that level ever since 1997, and we will not be able to ever go above that level without a change to our state policy, which would require a vote of the people, or 2/3 of the legislature. There is one workaround, and this is called the local option levy. This is, for example, the youth activities and academics levy that we pass. That's a local option levy where we say we as taxpayers, we're willing to pay a little extra in our property taxes to be able to support a specific project, and that only lasts for 5 years. And every 5 years it needs to be renewed. I will say Measure 5 kicks in. So even if the populace votes to have extra tax, it still cannot go above those $5 or $10 per thousand limits that are set by Measure 5. The other really significant change from Measure 50 is we no longer tax on the real market value of our properties. Measure 50 created what's called the assessed value, And the assessed value was 10% less than whatever your property was worth in 1996. And then it said this assessed value can never grow more than 3% per year. The only time it'll change more than 3% is if you do a major improvement, so a major remodel, or you build a brand new structure on a piece of land. If you do a new remodel or you do a new project, the total value of that does not get added to the bill. It gets applied with a changed property ratio. And if we go to the next slide, I didn't put it in the right order, but I'll go into this visual first. So what you see here on the slide in front of you is for all of the taxable property in Oregon. The blue line is the real market value of that property, and the orange line is the assessed value. And what I want you to just notice here is that there's the growing gap between what properties are worth for real market value and what that assessed value is worth. Since we tax on the orange line, we have limited the revenue that comes in from property tax over time. All right, so how is that affecting us? So the positives of Measure 5 and 50. The positives is it has kept property tax low for our property owners. It has made it predictable about how much that property tax will grow, so people can have a better sense, and it's keeping that cost low over time. The flip side of the coin is that property tax used to pay for the majority of government services. But as that revenue source has been limited over time, it has limited what we can do with those monies. It also has impacts on taxpayers, particularly with a lot of inequity between properties within our own city. So I want to give you guys a couple of scenarios of when that happens and why. So the first type of inequity is called a base year inequity. So let's say there is two homes right next to each other, home A and home B, and they were both worth $150,000 in 1990, and they were growing at a rate of 8% per year. But recall how back before 1990, properties were assessed every 6 years. And so home A had been assessed 6 years ago, and home B had just been reassessed. And so what happened is in 1996, the assessed value of home A was seen as $135,000 because it was assessed 6 years ago, but the recently assessed home B had the value of $200,000. Yeah.
Just a clarification of that, the assessed value limit was 10% below the 1996 assessment, so that's why it's 135 rather than 150.
Correct, thank you.
Right.
Yep.
So it's actually even less.
It's actually
versus
even less.
the home B, which is assessed at 10% below the 200.
Yeah, thank you. And so you see what happens is while these two properties, while they're worth the same on the market, they're paying very different property tax levels.
Councillor Dale?
But just to be clear, relative to the inequity, this is a flip of a coin, basically six.
Flip of a coin.
I mean, you could statistically say that 1/6 of, in every sixth of any given community just happens to have this happen.
Correct.
So it just is.
Yep, this is just built into the system
I agree.
by a flip of a six-sided die. Yeah. So this is a reason why properties that have the same value are taxed at very different rates. And we'll go to the next slide. There's also what's considered a neighborhood-to-neighborhood inequity. Here in the Rogue Valley, I prefer to call it a city-to-city inequity, because what this is really looked at is since those assessed values were locked in 1996, what we have found is that slower-growing neighborhoods are having a relatively higher tax rate than faster-growing neighborhoods. And so if you look at that comparison of what someone's paying in taxes versus what their house is worth, slower growing neighborhoods have a smaller gap between their real market value and their assessed value. And so they're paying relatively higher taxes than a house that has increased significantly in cost over time, but those taxes has remained low. And you can see that there in the table. I'll wait until eyes are ready and we'll move on to the next inequity. Oh, question.
But again, that's only locked in
This
since
is
that, right?
locked
Because
in.
once you have a set assessed value, it's a 3% at whatever that is.
Yeah.
So there's not, so this can happen neighborhood to neighborhood, but again, it is linear. Just,
It is linear. This is due to
yeah,
the
just
way
to
it was
that
adopted in
one-time thing with your
1996.
six-sided die.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And Jordan, I recall in conversations about how this came about, that they were thinking that 3% was essentially an inflationary number. That they thought, if you limit government to only growing by a sort of an average inflation amount, you can prevent the sort of the skyrocketing property taxes that people were seeing in other places, which we know is also linked to gentrification.
Correct.
And people being priced out of their house based on the taxes as their market value goes up. And so, there's a lot of those elements, but what I think that in the conversations I've been having with the League of Oregon Cities and other mayors is that what they didn't count on was that regulations change, that insurance never increases at 3%. Healthcare coverage never does. It is always significantly higher than that. So there are certain line items that are always jumping faster than the inflationary number, which creates this cinching process in the budget process. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
May
Councilor
I,
Dale.
may I add to that, Mayor? Thank you. Yeah, so agree completely with that, and maybe I'm skipping ahead to a punchline, but the other thing that the state of Oregon chose to do when they enacted this was to not reassess on transfer.
Correct.
So unlike other states, when there is a sale, it is reassessed. Now, it's kind of a pick your poison thing, right? It's either by neighborhood or it's by your neighbor, where someone may be living in a home for 30 years, have property tax value or taxes assessed as X, and their neighbor, like in California, when you transfer, it's reassessed, and so you may have a exorbitantly different amount because of that sale, whereas in Oregon, that does not occur. So people have been inheriting taxes from your six-sided die for 30 years almost. Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Other than improvements, renovations was the word I was going to. You're absolutely right. Improvements. Yep.
Correct. And to be clear, I'm hoping that this is just an informational to provide you guys help understanding how property taxes work and why it's a limited revenue source. By no means do I hope to influence if you think it's the right way or the wrong way.
Councilor Bloom.
No, I was just going to say, so we don't have the power to change this, obviously.
Wait till that last slide. We'll see what we got in store. So another inequity I just want to point out is the new property inequity, and this gets to the improvements that Councilor Dale was just talking about. So if someone has an empty piece of property and they build a new home or they do a major remodel, we don't tax what that real market value is. We tax the assessed value, which is calculated through the changed property ratio. And I'm hoping that I didn't hide this slide. We could just go to the next slide. I wanted to get into the changed property ratio. So the changed property ratio is what we use to calculate the assessed value of new or recently improved changes to a property. And the changed property ratio is whatever countywide our total assessed value is, that orange line, divided by the total real market value in the county, the blue line, and times it by 100. And it depends on your property class. So there's a residential change ratio and there's a commercial industrial change ratio. And there's some more for other different types of property classes. And so I want you to see in that second column, our county-wide change property ratio as of last year, this is from the 2024 assessor, was 57.3% for residential and 69.6% for commercial industrial. So if you built a brand new house for $500,000 is what its value is for the real market, then you will be paying taxes on 57.3% of that $500,000. And so how does that impact us here in Ashland? So because this change property ratio is set city or county-wide, the taxes could look very different here in Ashland. And actually, if you look at what our ratio should be here in Ashland, it's closer to 63%. And so what happens is when a brand new piece of property comes online for $500,000, we apply that 57.3% for the assessed value to calculate property taxes. That brand new house could very likely end up paying less money in taxes than a 30-year-old house that's also worth $500,000. And so that's what, so that's the new build inequity that can happen with our system. And actually, if you can go to the next slide, this really hit home in talent. And so what you see here in front of you is two pieces of property that were in talent that were impacted by the Alameda fire. So the first one is on the left. That's a manufactured home park property in talent. And you can see, so the green line is the assessed value, what we tax on, and the red line is the real market value as calculated by the assessor. And you can see in 2020, when the fire swept through and burnt down all the buildings on these properties, a significant drop in how much that property was assessed at. And then you can see the rebuild coming back on board and property real market value going up and the changes to the assessed value. For that chart on the left, I want you to notice the gap between the green and the red post-rebuild. It is significantly larger than the gap before the fire had come beforehand. So that is due to the changed property method of how we calculate new build property taxes. And then the example on the right is for a residential piece of property. You can see the loss of the home on the property, the rebuild in 2024, and then how that assessed value was calculated. And also for anyone watching, you can go to Jackson County Property Data Online and look up your property specifically if you want to see what your charts look like.
Councilor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one thing to point out on that slide, though, Jordan, if you go back one, is something that isn't readily apparent. It just occurred to me as I was looking at it is, so we have an individual or a family that had their house destroyed by fire. It's rebuilt. And if Measure 50 weren't in place, or the CPR that you're discussing, they would now may not be able to live there because they would then be reassessed at the orange line instead of the green line. So that's something to consider when we go through this too.
Though I will say the state actually did pass legislation specific to the Alameda fire and other fires that happened at that time to help control the property tax increase outside of our property tax system.
Save that though. These are the things that we have to consider
Save
alongside.
intervention at the state level.
Yep.
Yeah. So this just goes into that with some hypotheticals. So I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. And the last one I want to point out, because this does affect economic development in some ways, is that changed property ratio impact on commercial versus industrial. This does not show up in Ashland because we don't have large enough industrial land. But there is a property class called state industrial land, and that's very large industrial properties that can hold very large developments. And per our property tax law, the change property ratio for those large industrial lands is always or very close to 1. And so what we're finding is for these state industrial lands, there is significantly higher taxes on those lands than a commercial property of a similar size or similar nature. And so there is concerns about how it's impacting industry statewide. Once again, this does not impact Ashland. I don't think it actually impacts Jackson County at all, as we do not have any state industrial designated lands. Okay, so what has been the specific impact on the city of Ashland since we've been talking about revenues? So that green line is our property taxes over time. We very consistently grow at between 3 to 3.75% per year. That extra above 3%, once again, is from new build or new remodel work. Other places like Bend, even Medford, et cetera, they have a faster rate of their property tax growth because they have significantly more development. So there's more property value coming onto the books. What you see in the purple line is what our property tax revenue would be if Measure 5 and Measure 50 never passed. And as Councilor Dale pointed out, it's a significantly higher amount if Measure 5 and 50 were in place. For 2024, it was roughly a $9 million gap. And it is that gap that cities have been shifting their revenue streams to try to find other revenues to provide services that 20 to 30 years ago, property taxes primarily paid for. So we're gonna keep going. So this is just to show you the diversification of our revenue streams since 2017. So that yellow bar on the bottom is our property taxes growing at their roughly 3 to 3.75% rate every year. The utility bill fees, those are what we have of our electric user tax, our Ashland Forest Resiliency Project fee, and our public safety fee. That's the fee folks pay every month on their utility bills. We have our franchise fees, TLT revenues. That admin services, that shows up because we dissolved a separate internal services fund, but that is our internal charges for providing overhead things like IT, finance support, et cetera.
And that's for the enterprise funds?
That is for the enterprise
Yes.
funds.
Counselor Kaplan?
So as we see this line going up, those blue marks, the Central Services Fund or expenditure in fiscal 2021 was actually $9 million. So those numbers, those lines would be
Yeah,
smooth.
what should be
It was just-
shaved off.
Yeah, it should be shaved off. It's because it was in a different fund. It was still being spent. It was just in a different. It was not in the general fund.
Yeah.
So it looks like there was a jump in expenses in the general fund, and they were because they took on some of the expenses that were previously taken out of the Central Services Fund instead of the general fund.
Correct.
That's a really important element. Thank you, Counselor, because it does. If you just look at this as expenses, or I mean as revenue, it does look like there's been a significant increase in the general fund, and it is an accounting situation between fiscal year 21 and 22.
Correct. And we made that change at the recommendation of our auditor.
Right.
To have clearer books for the public to understand.
Counselor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. So this question is for Marianne and Brent. Excuse me. The utility bill fees, it would be nice to see those just kind of as a standalone because they're kind of stacked. But they almost look, I wouldn't say flat, but they haven't increased significantly. In fact, it looks like there's kind of a decrease in the current year. Am I looking at that correctly? I mean, to
So
the
Jordan,
extent that-
that's the AFR fee and the public safety
and the
fee.
electric user tax.
And we
electric-
had, that was flat.
It was flat. So
We
those
did
have been
not
flat
change
for
that
years, huh?
until
And
this
I know-
proposed budget.
I know that we haven't changed the rate, but what I'm saying is the total revenue that we're looking at has also been flat as well. And that is
Yes,
that kind of lack of
because
growth and so forth.
Based on the number of meters
Yep,
have
yep,
been,
okay.
yep.
Thank you.
Has been stable. And I will share, this will be shared the details of that orange bar on the Wednesday joint study session, but I will say 90% is the electric utility user tax. Yeah. And so, keep going. And so I want to emphasize, given a community member's comment was spot on, we're talking just about the revenue side of the coin. There is always an expense side of the coin too that this presentation does not touch on. But I want to point out what tools are available to the city to help increase revenues. And I have ranked them from the hardest to the easier. The hardest effort would be to change our statewide property tax system. As Councilor Dale pointed out, a lot of other states, for example, Colorado, they do reassess the assessed value every time a house is sold. We do not do that here in Oregon. Another option we could do is create a new taxing district. And so that is adding a taxing district to people's property taxes. Once again, it will be subject to the Measure 5 limits of whether it's a government or an education district. But that is a route that other communities have taken. We could also have the choice to increase development. As I said, Bend and Medford, they're able to increase revenues because they're significantly increasing property values within their city jurisdictions. Challenge here in Ashland, we have very much slower growth comparatively.
Councilor Duquesne?
Thank you, Mayor. Great slides. Thank you, Jordan. When increased development, and I agree, our surrounding municipalities are growing much, much quicker than we are. I look at annexing property into Ashland. It's not that difficult. I know that pushing out our urban growth boundary is a lot more difficult, but annexing additional property to broaden our tax base, because we have, I'm not sure the percentage of nonprofits here in Ashland, but I know it's a lot. So therefore, the taxes fall on the shoulders of the ratepayers. So increasing development, I think we should consider
Absolutely.
annexation.
And I will say, as City Council's support, the city did create a new economic development focused role.
Yes, we
I will
did.
say I do hold that project within my job description, and that is one of the purposes, is to help increase development here in Ashland, to help increase both population, revenue, and services.
Exactly, the annexation, and to be able to stretch out that tax base, because if not, then we're stuck.
Councillor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. And to kind of add on to Councillor Duquesne's point, specifically about the urban growth boundary, we are restricted in Ashland because of decisions of past leaders here in Ashland to do so. But the legislature has given us tools to be able to have that conversation, one-time expansion of our urban growth boundary that's much easier. And I think with a community conversation to identify where that might be could lead to more development, more families coming to Ashland.
Thank you.
Councillor Kaplan?
Yeah, Jordan, this is a great, harder and easier list. Create a new taxing district. The Jackson County has created a new taxing district. We've got a library district now that used to be part of the county. We have a soil and water conservation district. But I think I heard you say that any taxes collected in that taxing district still have to fit within the $10 cap on general government.
We do, and we have close to $3 remaining in the gap for government services for Ashland-based taxpayers. So we pay a little over $750 per $1,000 of value for government districts.
So if the county were to create new taxing districts, that would add
That would
let's
add
say,
to that.
That would add to that.
$750.
Let's just, for the sake of my example, that would add $3. Then we would be in a situation of compression.
Correct. And the
That
way
could push us into
compression
compression.
works, just so you all know, first, compression takes away any revenue from any local option levies that exist. And once those local options levy out, they take away the revenue from all taxing districts relative to what their total received amount is.
So that's the order in which
The order in which they take away
back
the
out the
revenue that
taxes
would've been.
to
Correct.
get back down to that specific dollar amount, the 15.
Yes.
The 50,
The 10 for government,
10 and
5 for
5,
10
yeah.
and 5, because they.
Right, but it's a
total of
yeah,
15.
that's what I meant. I didn't see the point in differentiating those. Councillor Hanson?
Can we go back one slide, please? Can we go back one slide? I think one of the things there's many things missing from that list, which is a great starting point, but one of them are automatic escalators. And I don't think all of our income streams are applicable to this, but when we were talking about the fees and how to structure that with escalators, it behooves us to look back in our history and see that several council bodies have not raised rates, whether it be electrical rates or water rates or fees. And it seems like that should be on our list for the next slide, which is building in systems and processes for which to add automatic escalators to try to future-proof our councils from being blind to rising costs. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, actually, just two things now. Actually, I was just going to respond. I believe to Councilor Kaplan, just to add on that the local option levies are discounted because otherwise you would raise something just to turn right around and shave it back off. So that, yeah. And yes, and I agree with Councilor Hanson that there needs to be some sort of level up, but there's the flip side of that coin is also just making sure that we do our due diligence as leadership and so forth to make sure that it's that balance that we're always looking for with, raising, but also just controlling and trying to make good strategic decisions as well.
Councillor Kaplan?
Yeah, I guess I also would like to add to that a little bit is that the methodology for raising utility rates, the electric and water, we're not trying to maximize taxes to the general fund. We're trying to make sure that those enterprises are covering their costs, and the methodology is all about that. There's nothing in the methodology that says that talks about the franchise fee portion of it, or the which goes to the general fund, or the electricity tax that goes to the general fund. That would be a change to the methodology, because the whole philosophy behind the enterprise funds is that they are like self-standing businesses. They're not a profit center. So we haven't managed them like a profit center. If we'd managed them like a profit center, we would have raised water rates, it wouldn't it's later than 2019. We haven't raised water rates since 2019, haven't raised electricity rates since 2021, because we were able to manage those enterprises without those increases, because we've been controlling costs to the benefit of our ratepayers and to the detriment of our general fund.
Yes, Councilor Hanson.
At my business, we saw insurance rates go up 48% from last year to this year. And that's going to increase our cost of goods and our services, right? In the city of Ashland, we can't pivot as quickly as our private enterprises. So, yeah, to the detriment of our general fund, but now we have less wiggle room. So I think that's one thing that I keep trying to convey from just where I sit and what I'm seeing to my colleagues and other community members, which is sometimes you don't see it until it shows up, and the discrepancy is so large and so grievous that now you have to cover major ground. So I don't have all the answers, but just seeing these problems come up and deal with them here in the civic world it's very, very challenging. And I know that we have our work ahead of us to get a hold of these diverging lines, to bring them back in order, to try to reduce our costs and find more revenue. But the reality of what we're seeing out there in the world is just exponential. It's exponential.
It strikes me that this is the same problem that other communities are dealing with across the state, that education districts are dealing with, that universities are dealing, that everybody is dealing with this same reality, and then the scramble is on for how to match the revenues to these expenses that are moving faster. So when people say, we used to be able to make this work with this tax rate, why can't you make it work now? I think it really is this differential between how fast expenses are rising faster than the what used to be the bulk of our general fund, right? It can't keep up, and we see that in that line that is moving linearly across the bottom. And I think so. This is very helpful to frame the conversation around why are we having these conversations about different ways of closing that gap. And I think it also behooves this council to be looking at those structural questions as we go forward, so that it isn't suddenly we have to cover this ground, but it is, do we change how we calculate franchise fees so that they can keep up in terms of their contribution to the general fund, even if we don't have to raise rates? Is there a way to restructure those contracts? That kind of thinking, I think, is really important. And I think it's worth noting that the League of Oregon Cities, because this has been the top conversation of almost every conference I have ever been to in the last 6 years, is there's a Measure 5 and 50 session, and people sit there and say, what are we going to do about this? And so the League of Oregon Cities has started a process where they went around and talked to communities across the state, and they're working to figure out how do what does that reform actually look like at the state level that doesn't price people out of their homes, but gives us the ability to keep closer to how quickly our expenses are running. It's not going to happen in this session, clearly, but I think it's worth noting that this is something that's recognized across the state, that people are struggling with this very same problem that we're struggling with. Councilor
If I
Duquesne.
may. Thank you, Mayor. Looking at the final slide, increased development, and touching on what the mayor said, because of the increase and the ability to keep up, I think it behooves us. It's so important that we are conservative and we live within our means and find ways that we can get revenue without more franchise fees, more hits on the utilities. We've already raised a couple of them, which I think we got the support of the community, the council. But right now, more than ever, these next 4 years going, like you mentioned, is so uncertain. It behooves us to manage our money well and live within our means and not get more and more. We really need to look at what we have and live within our means. I cannot express that enough. I would love to be able to see increase in development, what was brought up earlier about the urban growth boundaries, that it's much easier for us to access now and to be able to annex. We're moving forward, then let's push that across the line. Because if we don't broaden our tax base, if we don't sell off some of the things that we have that maybe we don't need right now, we are going to find ourselves in the same position again.
Did you have any further presentation?
We're good. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Councillor Kaplan?
Maybe just to comment on that, I think Councillor Duquesne is making a really important point, several really important points, and about increased development. It's not, there are multiple ways to increase development. It's not just spreading. It's also greater density, and we've talked about that. And I guess tomorrow we're going to talk about the climate-friendly areas, which talks about greater density. And we've released, we've been talking about increasing height limits or increasing minimums and getting rid of increasing minimums of density and raising maximum heights. So that also adds value in a way that will be. There'll be a break on it from the change property value. Even if you put an extra floor, a couple of extra stories on a building, you don't get the full value of that. But we do get it in terms of a tax base. We get more of that, and we get more community members, more places for people to live, more places for people to work.
Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, and I too, I guess, would like to add my comments to my colleagues here is that it really kind of distills down to a combination of three things. You can just raise revenue to meet whatever it is to the extent you can. You can just cut costs everywhere. Or really what you can do, I think, is really what we're trying to do is actually innovate new ideas and to come up with things. We talked about timing, about forecasting. We're looking at different ways to leverage the incredible assets that we have in our town. We're thinking about new ways for development, infill, otherwise, so forth. Whatever those are, we are at a point where we need to take a clear action on coming up and as collectively with new, interesting ideas that really we have no other option other than to look forward to doing interesting new things and bring the community along and to be leaders and hope that we can have buy-in, hoping that 21,000 of us will understand that it's going to be some combination of those three things. Things have been flat. Yes, businesses are suffering. It's a little bit different when we're in a community because it's you don't have a choice. You have to make these payments. And so we have to be mindful of that very much so. But we also, as 21,000, have to be mindful that these are just economic realities that transcend our little beautiful town here. And we are dealing with these things, but we can't do one without not considering the other two in any way. And we just have to try to get it right as best we can, and we'll correct course as we see fit to the best extent possible. And we're all in this together. So thank you for all the good work from everybody doing this. This is difficult, and I appreciate everyone's commitment to this.
Councillor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. I concur completely. We need to be creative. We need to take every single tool that's available to us to be able to kind of chart a path forward for our community. And as a kind of a call to action, I really can't emphasize enough the importance of getting involved. I mean, I see some new faces here, and it really lightens my heart to see that. We have vacancies on our committees. We have a vacancy on council. The important thing is to get involved, and I know it's difficult with work schedule and kids. Trust me, I get it. But it's all of our collective voices and ideas that's going to be able to help us get out of some of these challenges. And stepping up and speaking, volunteering, getting involved, that's how we become a stronger community and move forward together. So please consider that.
And the only thing that I would add in, I think all of those comments are really well taken. We need to move through this budgeting process that we're in, and then we need to spend some real time in the interim as we go through that next biennium, really looking at a lot of these structural questions and what exists here and what do we need to do. But the other piece of it too is that local government is now called on to do things that it didn't used to have to do. We didn't have to help our community fireproof its home, our homes and our structures 10 and 15 years ago. There are forces that are pushing on us now that are demanding things of local governments that never used to be on the plate. So it's not even as though we're trying to simply maintain the services we used to have. We have to add different types of services just to hold ourselves to the same level of safety and security that we had before. And our economy is changing. The city is looking at how do we invest in helping our business, our business owners. There are a number of things that are vastly different than they were just 5 or 10 years ago. And so that's also part of this calculus that we have to figure out. How do we approach this in a creative way, and what are the things that the community can bring to bear as individual citizens to help us with that? And so I think there are a lot of questions that are going to be on the table as we move forward. Is there anything else for this element, Jordan?
Thank you, Marianne. I'll look. Any more slides on your end?
We are good. Thank you.
Thank you both. And now we are to the Nonprofit Affordable Housing Tax Exemption Program.
It's ironic, right? It is. So how can we reduce our revenue burden?
And who doesn't have to pay taxes? Yeah, the irony is not lost on this council that we're going right from one to the next.
Well,
And it just, I think, shows us the challenge, right? The complexity of the challenge.
It does. As you had indicated, Mayor, these are questions that we're going to have to wrestle with throughout the coming biennium and the coming years. And I think 2 minutes after your last discussion is the first of those. So my name is Brandon Goldman, Community Development Director. Sitting next to me is Linda Reed, our Housing Program Manager. And we appreciate the time this evening on the study session to bring forth a question that was asked of staff by a local nonprofit housing development partner, questioning the practice in terms of how taxes are assessed on affordable housing unit developments. And I will state that what I'm referring to in terms of affordable housing developments are deed restricted, subsidized, low-income rental units predominantly. Affordable housing that is for ownership. The Jackson County already adjusts the taxes for those units, not based on real market value or assessed value, but on the deed restricted amount that that unit can be bought and sold for. So in those cases, they already do receive a reduced tax as a result of the inability to sell their unit at market rate. But we were approached by Columbia Care, who has a 29-unit rental housing project that is subsidized low income here in Ashland, noting that their property taxes were not part of their project pro forma, as they had in other communities have adopted components of ORS Section 307, 540 through 548 that enables local governments to adopt a tax exemption for nonprofit corporations providing housing. And so that was a surprise to them that Ashland did have taxes that were assessed on those. And in truth, it was a surprise to us as well, as we were under the impression that nonprofits were exempted from tax. But the same is not true for housing that is owned and operated by nonprofit organizations. And so in order to bring that request forward, our first step is to come to this body and see if you have an interest in proceeding. As was clearly outlined in the presentation, thank you, Deputy City Manager, about the different taxing districts. Ashland is only one taxing district that makes up our tax bill. I'm not sure the exact number, I'm sure Jordan would have that, but between 24-27% of our tax bill is what goes to the city of Ashland. In order to implement a tax exemption for the nonprofit corporations that operate affordable housing, we would be looking to ensure that at least 51% of the taxing districts are amenable to that. Failing reaching that 51% threshold, the city of Ashland could still implement a provision that exempted that 24 to 27% of the property tax bill. I would note that the request for the exemption, because it's subsidized housing, is coming at it from the opposite side of the last conversation where you were looking at the revenue generation of property tax. This is coming to it from the perspective of the housing provider and trying to reduce annual costs in order to keep rent levels down. And with that, I know that Linda has a lot more experience in reviewing this. We did work with our former interim city attorney, Doug McGarry, quite a bit in developing a draft ordinance, in large part because the city of Phoenix was also looking at implementing this. City of Medford already has. And so one of the reasons that we've come before you and staff was supportive through the Community Development Department of bringing this forward is in order to maintain a competitive parity with the other communities for where affordable housing is likely to go. As affordable housing providers are looking at their ongoing operating costs as well as the building their project pro forma, annual taxes are obviously a central part of that. And so if a housing provider can look at nearby communities and be tax exempt, but in Ashland they are not, that might be a decision point that they would consider. And we're trying to encourage affordable housing to choose Ashland as their location within the valley. With that, turn it over to Linda.
And it also meets one of our housing production strategy goals, well, actually two of them, but incentivizing the development of affordable housing and looking at ways and working with affordable housing partners to identify those ways, which we have, and they are telling us that this is one of those ways. And honestly, I think Brandon covered pretty much everything, which he always does really well. But I'm really happy to answer any questions or go into depth on any of this if that's what you would like to do at this time.
So I have a question about just real dollars. If we were to put this tax exemption into place with our existing properties that fall under this regulation, what would the difference be to our general fund?
So, I mean, at this point, it would only apply to two developments that currently exist in the city, Columbia Care and Star Thistle. Star Thistle already has a pretty limited tax bill, maybe because they're getting another kind of exemption. So there are many exemptions in chapter, 307, that a lot of other affordable housing providers are already getting. Access receives some tax exemptions. The Housing Authority is tax exempt. So a lot of those developments are already exempted from taxes. And then we do have several affordable housing developments that are not owned by nonprofit organizations, so they would not qualify. So at this point, only two developments would qualify. And the total of their taxes that we are receiving from the taxes collected from those entities is about $13,000 a year. So it's pretty nominal in comparison to the budget. If we look toward the future with like new development happening, it might be more of an impact. When we look at past development patterns, the largest developer of affordable housing in our valley is the Housing Authority, which is already tax exempt. So they would continue to be, so we wouldn't have collected those taxes anyway. And they have developed 120 units in the past 10 years. Access is the second largest provider or developer in our recent history. And they are also generally tax exempt, although I think in the city of Medford, they did have an issue with one of their developments, which spurred the city to change their tax structure and adopt this as well. Because Access no longer qualified, one of their developments no longer qualified under the previous tax exemption they were receiving.
And although not asked, I would note that a number of annexation requests that the council has recently approved that incorporated affordable housing as rental housing were to be provided by the for-profit development entity that was putting that forward. So those would be privately owned, not nonprofit owned, and as such would still be assessed taxes even were the city to implement this nonprofit corporation tax exemption. So that's just something to consider, that we do see a mix of affordable housing that's both owned by nonprofits and owned by other entities. For instance, the Stratford receives USDA loans to subsidize it to keep it affordable, but it is not owned by a nonprofit organization. I think Daniel
Donald E. Lewis.
Donald E. Lewis
Yeah.
is another that falls into that category. So we're fortunate that there are other incentives to create affordable housing that entities other than nonprofits do get into the affordable housing arena and build it and utilize low-income housing tax credits or USDA loans. And as such, those would still be required to pay taxes under this provision were it passed.
And since we're answering questions that weren't asked,
The questions are always asked. This is a study session.
I would add that the city of Ashland has had an affordable housing program since 1992. We have waived SDCs since 1992, long before other communities in our region have done that. We've had some other incentives. Obviously, we have some grant funding, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is something that other communities don't have. And then we do some fee waivers. And then we have some planning regulations that compel affordable housing, but we also have some carrots in there too. In recent years, cities around us have adopted many of those strategies as well. So while our housing or our land costs are higher than other communities, we had all these levers to help buy down those costs. But in recent years, other communities have added those levers too. So that puts us back at a disadvantage again, because our land costs are still higher than land costs relative, to the rest of the valley. But we don't now have as many incentives as we used to. So anyway, since you didn't ask.
We wish we would have asked it. It's a great question. Any other questions for staff? Councilor Dale.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thank you both. I guess I'll start with a statement before I get into the question. So yeah, I guess it sounds good. I would say, I guess to be quite honest, though, I would have to say I don't not enough information, not from you guys, but to be able to make that decision because especially after the discussion we're just had and what we're having is of course we want to incentivize affordable. Of course we want to do these things. I guess I would need to see some sort of modeling. I would say without going too much into the weeds about. Well, what are the trade-offs relative to these things? We've been doing this since 1992, and causation does not equal correlation. I totally get that, but it's like, what are the differences that other communities are doing that's not Ashland? There's all kinds of different levers that I just want to make sure that I don't know the answer to the question of whether this is a good idea or not. It sure sounds like one, but I'm not sure. So I don't know if we could provide some context or some alternatives or some sort of opportunity cost kind of big picture to allow council to make a more informed decision, however that looks. I just wanted to kind of plant that seed. And my question is, and this may be for Jordan, but the taxes, is it just the line item for City of Ashland? Would they still pay taxes on Ashland School District and the bonds and the other stuff like that? Or is it?
So were the City of Ashland to pass it independent of those other
they're all line
taxing
items.
districts,
Yeah.
then only the City of Ashland's would be exempted. However, it was our recommendation that should the council direct us, that we reach out to the Ashland School District as the second largest taxing entity within our area to exceed the 51%. And if over 51% of the districts, Ashland plus the school district, were agreeable, then it would apply to 100% of the tax bill, which would be all the other taxing districts would be folded into that exemption.
Interesting. Thank you, Brandon.
And how does this work with our neighboring communities? Are they at 100%, or have they passed resolutions or ordinances that are just limited to their tax amount on the bill?
I don't think Phoenix has as of yet passed it, but do you know?
Or maybe
City of
Medford's?
I believe Medford's is 100%.
100%. Okay, great.
And I can share Talent's is only the city's portion.
In Talent, it's just the city's portion. Okay, great. And Councilor Bloom.
Sorry, just out of curiosity, is that because it's Talent Phoenix School District, and so something kind of went haywire there? Is there?
It was a policy that was passed before I worked in Talent,
Okay.
but my understanding is it was wanting to keep revenues going towards the school district.
I see. Cool. Thank you.
Councilor Hanson.
So in the packet, you estimate that those current properties are at $13,000 tax value. And it seems like a bargain to me to encourage affordable development here in Ashland that is kind of a very strong base for our families, for kids in schools, for keeping the other things that are really important in our tax base, other than paying property taxes, which is employment and consuming goods and livability and arts and culture and all of that stuff. So I too would like to see more of a prospectus to kind of have a more educated financial awareness to make a decision. But just on ideological anecdotes alone, it seems like a total hell yes. For sure, we should do this. But I would hate to shoot ourselves into the foot having very little data other than that one number of $13,000 for those two. We have a lot of opportunities coming to build in the near future, and I certainly want to be competitive with our neighbors, especially with affordable housing. And given that, I think we aspire as a community to help with some of our surplus properties in affordable housing. Just every effort we can do to make us more attractive, I'm in support of. But I to Councilor Dale's point, I would like some more information.
Councilor Kaplan?
Thanks, Mayor. I mean, I've also, I guess, feel similar to the way that I've heard from many others. It's leaning towards it, but I would like to, I would encourage conversations with the school district and see if they're interested as well. I certainly, they've got a much more serious fiscal problem than the city of Ashland does. It's a current fiscal problem. It's not a projected fiscal, imbalance. And our tax bill going to the school district is roughly twice what it is to the individual's tax bill to the school district is roughly twice what it is to the city. So it's about more like 50% if you include the local levies, right? So if in this case, it's only $13,000, so $26,000 roughly would be the impact on the school district. But still, I guess on the other hand, I'm also thinking it doesn't cost very much. It also doesn't provide very much benefit. $13,000 on how many housing units are these two developments?
So Star Thistle is 12 and Columbia Care is 29 plus
29,
a
so 50.
manager's unit. But
That's
that's
less than 50.
they pay that. I mean, their tax bills are really about 35.
Yeah.
Star Thistle pays a lot less for some reason. And
Right.
I know in Columbia Care's case, I mean, both of those developments are actually targeted to 30% of the area median income, so the lowest incomes. They both actually serve special needs populations. Probably the most vulnerable and the least ability to pay, and people who most likely would be homeless if it wasn't for those two developments. And they also provide some measure of case management, so their costs are higher. So it really does impact their bottom line in a way to have, in many ways, to have that extra revenue to support those services that they offer and to keep their rents at the lowest. We've often said we want permanent supportive housing. Those are both permanent supportive housing developments. So that's, the hardest to provide because it is the most expensive all around. And I don't have hard numbers for you, but I know in the past, affordable housing development has had a 10-to-1 multiplier in communities for economic development and economic impacts into a community. That was quite a long time ago, so I don't know what the new numbers are. Similarly, I know that the Ashland School District has been interested in affordable housing because they recognize that the children that they are getting enrolled in their school districts are coming from the affordable housing developments, and so that increases their bottom line as well.
Councilor Duquesne?
Thank you, Mayor. Honestly, Linda, you were answering my question, so I was pretty taken with that, and I agree. When I look at this, I think about the growth in the community, like you mentioned, our children and the impact there. But actually, my question was asked and answered by you. And I will agree with my colleagues that seeing more information is good. However, I feel very good about this. And I would appreciate more. You can't have too much information. And something you said, Brandon, earlier, you kind of mentioned a percentage or who does pay taxes and how it's affordable housing, but taxes are.
Yeah, I was
Can you
referring
say
to
that?
affordable housing for ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
if you were low-income qualified and you purchased affordable home for, let's say, $175,000, and that home has a real market value, if it could be sold on the open market for $500,000, the tax assessor would look at our resale restriction covenant that says you can't sell it for more than $175,000, and as such, assess it at that value. So the Jackson County has been very helpful in terms of ensuring that ownership affordable housing does not face tax increases that exceed the ability for people to sell their homes at those increasing values.
And that is specific to the City of Ashland's affordable housing program. So they work with us and they recognize that we are deed restricting and artificially keeping the cost of some housing units low. And so they're not charging those homes or those homeowners a tax amount on a value that their home cannot realize because we are artificially deed restricting it.
I mean, essentially, the market value is $175,000.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Councilor Bloom.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, before us, and what it appears to be is you're looking for direction on an ordinance that would kind of apply to all, and currently it's just these two, but looking for the future. Is there a path, because I agree with my colleagues here about wanting to kind of dig in and get more information. Is there a pathway to just exempting these two for now while we discuss an ordinance kind of with more information coming?
So we can always come back with more information. We can even approach the school district and gauge their interest and still come back with more information because we're not really adopting this ordinance. We just are getting direction from you whether we should move forward with this. Is that correct?
Great. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking out loud here. The way I'm looking is, if we talk to the district and we can exempt these two organizations, which is really important, especially to me, Star Thistle and kind of the pressures that are happening at the federal level on people with developmental disabilities, giving them some relief in the immediate. Well, we look at the bigger picture and how this kind of plays against our ideas of how do we balance this, right? We're going to give tax exempt status to these developments. It's really important to have, more low income opportunities here in Ashland, while also how do we balance that with we need more revenue and property taxes, so how do we also develop and making sure that we're approaching this in a balanced way and at the same time, so we're not tipping the scale one way or the other and find ourselves up here saying, oops, we kind of overshot this one.
Seems like a really hard job.
I do think that providing an exemption to two specific nonprofit corporations might not be applicable, but I think that the 307-540 and the provisions in there do allow a community to establish the criteria by which a nonprofit corporation is eligible. So if there's qualities of these developments, as Linda referenced, providing supportive housing or providing housing to 30% AMI and below, those might be criteria-based determinants that could be put into the ordinance as to what is eligible for the tax exemption versus 80% AMI rentals.
Right.
Yeah, the city has discretion to make additional rules. They just can't be in opposition to the rules that the state has set out.
Yeah.
Sure, Jordan.
Tanya, I just have a request to council. As you're asking for more information, if you could help clarify what type of information you're looking for, just so we know what to make sure we come back with for the most productive conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's, unless there are more questions, I think it's time to circle in on what the direction to staff will be. It seems like there's a generally interest in looking at this, and we've got the draft ordinance in front of us here. And so if that sounds right, that we are interested in staff continuing to work on it, a couple of the things that I have heard are to have a conversation with the school district and see what their level of interest looks like. And then to have a deeper analysis of future development. Because one of the things that we know is that we have a lot more development in the pipeline than we have had for a very long time. And some of that, especially if it's annexing in, is going to come with some requirements around affordable housing. And so what does that actually look like? We know that from the earlier discussion that a big part of our challenge is the fact that so much of Ashland is already nonprofit exempt. You know, major drivers of our economy are that our school district, the city, the variety of large property holders are not paying taxes already. So is that the right element? Councilor Dale, I know you had some specific ideas.
Yeah, and thank you, Mayor. And I was thinking about that. So absolutely, and probably just as I'm thinking in real time here, and again, I certainly want to refrain from giving staff poor direction. But what I was kind of thinking about was something along the lines, and I would open this up to council, is maybe, what would be our projected assumption of increase of affordable housing in like 5 years, something like that, like a 5-year look ahead or something like that. I don't know if that's the right number, but I open to suggestions. But I'm just trying to say, give us something. I don't want to go more than 10. I mean, that's theoretical at that point. I'm just in the next 5 years.
What is it?
Where are we? Or you could even say 4. I don't care. 3 to 5. But I'm just saying something out there so we can kind of look ahead and see if we can see a line, see if we can see a trend, and what that would be a cost to the city. Because as we think about this, we're talking about fees, we're talking about other things. That's going to be, again, we're talking affordability. It's not just tax relief. It's other things too. So all things considered. So I would probably say, I'll leave it to staff's discretion, but something around maybe 3 to 5 years of what you think the affordable housing market growth would be and what that would affect our general fund. Is that fair? Is that reasonable? Or is there anything I'm not thinking of? Brandon, Linda?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think part of what we'll try and do is look at the affordable housing nonprofit housing provided, and then the market or private developer provided affordable housing, because again, they're two different tranches in this regard.
We just need to know what the cost would be, knowing full well, and then we can make the decision of what's the benefit. I think if we have the cost, I think we can do the benefit side of it, of the analysis, and put the pieces together to give you good direction. Thank you.
Does that sound like the will of the council? Is there a general agreement to look at the future casting as Councilor Dale has outlined it? Councilor Duquesne.
Thank you. I'm in 100% agreement with this. Do you know when we would have that back?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was on. Oh.
So.
I think, would we try to approach the school district first so that we have a more comprehensive package, or do you think we would come back before that?
I'm seeing council heads nod in terms of approaching the school district to see if there's an interest. And then we'll be able to bring both to you and the school district this information so both bodies can make a determination. In terms of when it will come back, probably not until July or August. We'll have to look at what other projects we have going forward. And it'll also depend on the school district's makeup. We'll wait until the elections are concluded and new positions are filled.
Yeah, there is that element. Is there interest in looking? Go ahead, Councilor Kaplan.
Yeah, I just had one more thing. For me, I absolutely agree. I'd like you to consult with the school district. That doesn't necessarily mean that I would only support going forward with this if the school district were also going forward. But I'd like to have the information as we're going forward. And also, I'm interested in the level of affordable housing. Are we talking about 80%, 60%, 30%?
Yeah, so this
because on an ongoing operational basis, a 30% of a target, this makes a big difference. For an 80% affordable housing, it's much less. Some finding ways to do more to subsidize the capital cost might actually have a bigger impact on that.
Yeah, the state legislation targets it at the first year at 60% AMI, and then after that, incomes can increase up to 80% for the occupants under the state program. But again, should the council and the school district want to refine that further, it looks like the legislation allows that to be contracted to a lower income level.
Right, because I'm thinking about the trade-off that's potentially involved, or we could do it all, but it just costs more to do it all. But we have mostly, we've not subsidized the operating of these things, we've subsidized the capital costs. So what is the right trade-off at those levels of an 80% AMI or 30% AMI? My guess is that subsidizing the operating is much more important at the 30% AMI than it is at the 80% AMI.
Right. Sure.
So therefore, we should use that tool for that.
And I would
target.
clarify that it is not allowed for units that are targeted to 80% AMI. It is only allowed for units targeted to 60% AMI. There is an exception that allows for, so they have to apply every year and they have to tell us what the people living in the units are earning. And I think what they're saying is that we wouldn't penalize someone because now their resident who came in at 60% now makes 80%. They wouldn't have to evict them in order to continue qualifying. For that clarification. So it definitely is not, 80% level is not allowed. So definitely 60 and below.
60 and 30, yeah. Okay.
Although there is a average, but we don't have to talk about that.
We could get really complicated.
It's very specific.
Councilor Kaplan, then are you thinking then in terms of looking at some different criteria? There was a discussion about
that's
the
why
criteria.
that's
And
why I'm
so what
looking-
are our options on the criteria side?
Right.
So just to recap, we would be looking at staff approaching the school district after the elections and after you have the full board there, future casting out 3 to 5 years in terms of what this might mean, and then what are the different options in terms of criteria by which a development would qualify. Are all of those things workable? I know a big part of our conversation has been, making sure that we refine our asks so that they are not bigger than we think they are, and then staff has to scramble to bring them back to us. So are those all things that you feel are reasonably easy to get your hands on or doable?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. And is there anything else that you need from us in terms of refining that guidance in that direction?
No, I think it's really clear. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. So thank you for bringing this to us. One of the things that I think this council appreciates is the depth of knowledge and expertise that you all have that we don't. So we wouldn't spot these things without you all paying attention and talking with our community partners and then working with legal to bring them forward to us. So thank you for bringing this topic forward, and we look forward to seeing you when you come back with some more, knowing more about having had that conversation and looking into the details. All right, if there is nothing else, thank you so much for the presentation and the discussion. Meeting is adjourned.